Hello everyone, this is Rick. Welcome to an episode where we will discuss the later Vedic period. Now, this later Vedic period came after the early Vedic period. I have made a video on the early Vedic period. Please go through it before watching this so that you get the complete context of the Vedic era. So in this video, we will discuss what are the social changes that happened during the later Vedic period, and also we are going to go through a few important question answers which will help you in your exams. So without doing any delay, let's begin. Later Vedic period. Literary and archaeological sources. So to understand about any period of history, we need to get through the sources. We need to analyze the sources. Sources are mainly of two types, that is literary, meaning the written sources, and archaeological, meaning the material sources. So what were the literary and archaeological sources of the later Vedic period? The period between 1000 BC and 500 BC is known as later Vedic period. So it spanned for a time period of roughly 500 years from 1000 BC to 500 BC. During this time, the Aryans settled in the Gangetic Valley. So according to the sources available, the Aryans before this in the early Vedic period used to settle in the Sapta Sindhu region, but now they are settling in the Gangetic Valley. That means they are moving eastwards. Information comes from the Shama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda produced during this period. So there, the three later Vedas, that is Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and Atharva Veda, was written during the later Vedic period. Hence, most of the information about the later Vedic period are from these three texts. Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads were written giving details of society. So the other texts are the extension of the Vedas, that is the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. So they were also written during the later Vedic period. Hence, we get a lot of information about the later Vedic period from these texts also. The Ramayana and Mahabharata, known as the epics, were composed during these age. So the Ramayana and Mahabharata are epic stories which were composed during this period, and they provide, even though they are stories, they provide a lot of information about the history of the later Vedic period. Excavations in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan provide archaeological evidence. So, archaeological evidence are the materialistic remains. Excavations in Punjab, when we dig the soil of many places in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan, we get evidence of later Vedic artifacts. Remains are studied with Vedic texts for a clearer picture of the Vedic society. So, remains are combined and analyzed in order to prove the Vedic texts, and thus corroboration is done, which is called a combined study. So literary and archaeological sources combine together to give information about the later Vedic period. Settlements. How were the settlements during the later Vedic period? So migration. People moved eastwards from Sapta Sindhu and began settling in western Uttar Pradesh and Ganga Yamuna Doab. Ganga Yamuna Doab means the area between the two rivers of Ganga and Yamuna. So people moved from the Sapta Sindhu region, which is the land of seven rivers, during the early Vedic period, and they moved eastwards towards Uttar Pradesh and Ganga Yamuna Doab. So there was a migration among the later Vedic people. Agriculture expanded and people began leading a settled life. Agriculture boomed during this period. We know early Vedic period had a pastoral economy, but here we have an agricultural economy. So agriculture expanded and it used to support the huge population during this period. Kingdom was established to the east of Ayodhya, Koshala. Koshala was the kingdom which was established in the east of Ayodhya. Kashi was another important kingdom near Varanasi. So these are important settlements we find evidence during the later Vedic period. Kuru was a kingdom near modern Delhi. So Kuru kingdom is near Delhi. Magad, major kingdom in modern Patna and Gaya. Later on, this proved to be the most important kingdom during 6th century BC. So Magad became the most important kingdom and along with Kuru, Kashi and Koshala. Emergence of cities. So urbanization came into existence during the later Vedic period, and that can be evidenced with the emergence of important cities. Settlements slowly transformed into organized kingdoms and towns. Political structure. How was the administration and political structure during the later Vedic period? Tribal structure gave way to large kingdoms called Janapadas. So during the early Vedic period, we have seen how Vis and Janas came into existence. So that structure evolved further and gave way to kingdoms, proper kingdoms called Janapadas. Kingship became hereditary and rulers grew powerful. So kingship became on a hereditary basis. The rulers became very powerful. A king used to be the most powerful entity in the later Vedic structure. The Sabha and Samiti assemblies lost importance over time. So, Sabhas and Samitis in the early Vedic period were ways to check the power of the king. But during the later Vedic period, Sabha and Samiti's power declined, thus, king became the ultimate power in a Janapad. As kingdoms expanded, administration became more complex with many officials. So, kingdoms expanded, and to handle the large kingdom, many administrative officials were required. So, administration becomes more complex with a lot of administrators. Coronation ritual gave supreme power and status as God's representative. So there was yagyas held. Rajsuya yagya was the ritual through which a king was coronated, and he was believed to be the representative of God on earth. Ashwamedha Yagya used to happen, and in this form of sacrificial rituals, horse sacrifice extended control wherever the royal horse roamed freely. So, a horse was let loose in the kingdom, and if anyone did not restrict the horse, then wherever the horse went, that part or that area came under the king's rule. So, that was Ashwamedha Yagya. Vajapaya Yagya was performed to restore the strength of a middle-aged king, elevating him to Raja or Samrat. So a king could be elevated to the position of a Samrat, means an emperor more or less. So that was done through the sacrificial ritual of Vajapaya Yagya. Taxation system means how the king used to collect tax. So king collected regular tax called bali through officers maintained from taxes. So bali was the portion of production which was collected by the king, and the collection used to happen with the help of different collectors or officers. So that was the political structure of the later Vedic period. Family. How was the family unit in the later Vedic period? So, family was basically patriarchal, and father was the head of the family and he held immense power. So, families were patriarchal during the later Vedic period. The father or the head, eldest male member, had all the power in the family. Father could even disinherit his son. Worship of male ancestors was common. So father could let go of his son because of some feud or because of some family politics. The father could even disinherit his son, and a disinherited son will not have any right over the father's property. So there was also worship of male ancestors during the later Vedic period. Women faced polygamy and hardships of husbands if the husband had multiple wives. So women faced polygamy means during the early Vedic period, if you remember, I had said that marriages were mainly monogamous in nature, means one partner was for one person. But in the later Vedic period, a male member could marry multiple wives. So thus women had to face polygamy and hardships in life. Loss of status. Women lost prestige of the early Vedic age. Here, all the power rested in the hands of the male members, so women lost the prestige and power which they had during the early Vedic period. Names like Gargi and Vachaknavi stand out but were few. So there were a few notable women, but they were almost insignificant during the later Vedic period. Women had no right to inherit property from fathers. Women did not have any right over the hereditary property of the family. Women depended on husband's income for survival. So women were totally in the mercy of the male members of the society. Varna system. How did the caste system function during the later Vedic period? Rigid system. Varna became rigid and hereditary. So it was no more based on what kind of occupation a person did. It became rigid and hereditary. Means son of a Brahmin will become a Brahmin, son of a Kshatriya will become a Kshatriya. So thus for the all other castes. Status was determined by birth, not occupation. So, what kind of status a person will hold in the society was based on in which family, was based according to which family the person took birth in. So, therefore, the status of one's life was based on birth. There was no intermingling of caste, interdining and intermarriage between varnas were forbidden. So one had to marry within his own caste only. Brahmanas and Kshatriyas enjoyed greater privileges because they were considered to be higher caste people. Formed the common Vaishyas formed the common people engaged in agriculture, cattle breeding, trade, and industry. So Vaishyas were the common people in the society who did all the basic functions like agriculture, trade, cattle breeding, and different kinds of industrial activities. Shudras were people who served the upper three varnas and were deprived from education and property. So Shudras did not have any right in the society. They were deprived from even basic privileges like education and property. Society became deeply divided due to the caste rigidity. So because of all this rigid structure, the society became very much divided. Position of women. What was the status of women in the later Vedic period? There was a decline in the status of women. During the later Vedic period, women were regarded inferior to men. What were the duties of women? Their primary duty was household care. So household care was the primary duty of the woman in the later Vedic period. They were allowed to participate in ceremonies but excluded from assemblies. So in the assemblies, the women did not have any say. However, they were allowed to participate in the religious ceremonies of the later Vedic period. Education was totally banned for women. Women were not allowed to study Vedic literature. So they had to remain illiterate and totally at the mercy of their husbands. Widow remarriage was not encouraged during this time. Widow remarriage did not have any scope during the time of later Vedic period. Women became financially and socially dependent on men. They lost equality of the early Vedic period and were restricted in rights. Thus, women were in an inferior position compared to the men in the society. Four ashramas. Four ashramas means the four stages of human life. So Brahmacharya was the first stage where boys lived in Gurukul with Guru and studied the Vedas. So this was the student phase of one's life where they lived in Gurukul and studied with Guru. What did they study? They studied the Vedas. Grihastha was the second stage where a man was supposed to have a family life. So man married, raised family and lived as a householder. So Grihastha was the stage where a man was supposed to take care of his family. The third stage was Vanaprastha, where the man gave up worldly life and lived in the forest as an hermit. So during the Vanaprastha period, a man lived a life of retirement where he gave up all the worldly pleasures and lived in the forest as a hermit. Sannyasa was the fourth stage where a man renounced worldly life aimed for salvation. So, sannyasa was the period where a man left everything and waited for his salvation, means waited for death. Ashramas guided life from childhood to spiritual liberation. So these four stages concerned itself not only with what are your duties in the society but also your spiritual well-being. Each stage had moral and religious responsibilities. Each stage, a man was supposed to take up some moral and religious responsibilities. Clear mention of four ashramas emerges in this era. So, during the later Vedic period, we get clear mention of the four stages of human life. Religion. How did the religion evolve during the time of later Vedic period? So gods of early Vedic age lost prominence during the later Vedic time. Gods, anthropomorphic gods means gods which were based on natural elements like Vayu, Varuna, Surya, all these gods lost their importance during the later Vedic times. Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva became more important. So these were the three gods who were respected and worshipped much more during the later Vedic period. Female deities also came into existence, that is, Lakshmi, Durga, Kali, and Parvati were worshipped. So, these were the new female gods who were respected and worshipped during the later Vedic period. Sacrifices like Ashwamedha, Rajasuya, and Bhajapeya performed by the kings. So the rituals of Vedic worship became much more complex with elaborate yagyas or sacrificial rituals being performed. Both became elaborate and expensive, public and domestic worship. So even if you did some kind of religious rituals in your house, then that also became very expensive along with the public form of religious rituals which were practiced. As rituals grew complex, Brahmanas gained importance because they were the ones who used to do the rituals. So, as the rituals became more complex, power was given to the Brahmanas. Common people found religion too complex, leading to rise of simpler faiths later. So common people found all these religious systems to be very much complex and they sought refuge in other simpler form of religion later on, that is Jainism and Buddhism. Hinduism. What was the situation of Hinduism as a whole during the later Vedic period? So, evolution Hinduism evolved as a philosophy and way of life over centuries. So, now Hinduism was totally a philosophical concept where anyone could become a Hindu. It was a way of life. Certain disciplines, if you follow, then you could become a Hindu. So the concept that Hinduism is not a religion, it is a way of life, came during the later Vedic period, and it is still being followed today. Believe in one supreme energy or Shakti as a source of creation. So, as a source of creation, the Hindus believed in one supreme energy which was termed as Shakti during the later Vedic period. In the early Vedic period, we get the term Brahma. Now we get the term Shakti as the supreme energy. Moral duty to do right and live a pious life. So there was the principle of dharma, which means it was the moral duty of all people to do the right thing and live with a code of righteousness, that is, to live a pious life. Consequences of actions were determined in future lives. So, this was the principle of karma in the later Vedic period, where it was believed that if you do something good in this life, then in your next rebirth, you will have a better situation in your life. However, if you do something bad, then your next life will also be bad. So, whatever actions you perform in your present life will have consequences later, good or bad consequences. Soul was important, reborn after death into new bodies. So soul is eternal, and after every rebirth the soul gets a form of a new body. That was the concept of Hinduism during the later Vedic period. Upanishads were there, which were the main source of Hindu philosophy during the later Vedic period. Hindu belief was that God is the creator, preserver, and destroyer, worshipped in many forms. So, that was Hinduism according to later Vedic culture. How was the livelihood of the people in this period? Agriculture was the chief occupation, with crops like barley, wheat, rice, beans, sesame, and lentils. So, agriculture was the chief occupation, and people cultivated agricultural products like barley, wheat, rice, beans, sesame, and lentils. Cattle rearing was also continued as an important form of livelihood. Iron tools were there for the first time, and that helped to spread agriculture in the fertile areas, because iron plows and axes helped the clearing of forests and making the forest lands into agricultural lands. Artisans, carpenters, leather workers, jewelers, dyers, potters are mentioned in the later Vedic sources, who did the works of art and craft. Weaving was also practiced, as we see that there was an introduction of painted grey ware pottery. So, painted grey ware pottery was the new form of ceramics introduced during the later Vedic period. Trade also existed in a simple form with barter or exchange system, means things in exchange of other things. So trade existed in simpler form. Economic basis was mainly agrarian, with craft and trade support. So economy was mainly based on agriculture, with a lot of support from craft and other forms of trade. Epics were there during this era. Epics are mythological stories. Some people also believe it to be historical, but if you go practically, then it is better to take it as exaggerated forms of history. So epics were there, and this age is commonly called as epic age, because two main important epics, that is Ramayana and Mahabharata, was composed during this time. So Ramayana was said to have been composed by Balmiki, and incident precedes Mahabharata by 150 years. So according to what has been given in ICSE books, Ramayana was the first text or the first epic text which was composed by Valmiki, and then came the Mahabharata. It is the largest epic in the world with more than 1 lakh verses divided into 18 parvas. If you don't know what are parvas, you can take it as chapters. So, Mahabharata is the largest epic divided into 18 parvas. Rishi Ved Vyas. So, traditionally, Ved Vyas is credited with composing of Mahabharata. Scholars doubt one person could complete it. The story is episodic. So, even though there are different authors for the two epics, but scholars say that they might have provided the basis of the story, but later on many authors over time have added to the story, making it what it is today. So scholars have a doubt that one person could have written it. So there was an evolution or addition through the different phases in history. The themes deal with Pandavas, Kauravas conflict, cosmology, ethics, theology, and philosophy. So, different aspects of the ancient life are dealt with in these epics. Bhagavad Gita is a philosophical text within Mahabharata. So, Gita is a part of Mahabharata. Gita, as you know, is the holiest or the sacred text of the Hindus. It is a part of Mahabharata where Krishna is explaining Arjuna the necessity of war during the Kurukshetra, at the beginning of the Kurukshetra war. Languages are there. Ramayana is written in Sanskrit but also existed in Prakrit in earlier ballads. So Ramayana was written in Sanskrit and it also existed before in the Prakrit language. So epics are important sources of history, especially regarding the later Vedic period. Now, comparison between early Vedic and later Vedic age. How was the early Vedic period different from the later Vedic period? Settlements. Early Aryans settled in the Sapta Sindhu region. Later Aryans moved eastwards into Ganga Yamuna Doab. Society. Early society divided into four varnas by occupation. Later period made varnas hereditary. Women's status. Early women had near equal rights. Later periods saw decline and restrictions. Religion. Early Aryans worshipped Indra, Varun, Surya. Later Vedic people worshipped Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Early economy was pastoral. Later economy was mainly agricultural. Early rituals were simpler. Later rituals became complex with sacrifices. Equality reduced, caste rigidities increased in the later Vedic period. Now we will go through the question answers which will be important to you in your exams and will also help you to understand this chapter in a much better way. Discuss the sources for the study of the later Vedic age. The sources for the study of the later Vedic age are both literary and archaeological. The literary sources include the three later Vedas, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. The other Vedic texts, such as Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, are also composed. The two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, provide valuable information. Archaeological sources include excavations in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, and Rajasthan. The remains found are correlated with Vedic texts for better understanding. In which region did the Aryans settle in the later Vedic period? The Aryans moved eastwards from the Sapta Sindhu area. They settled in western Uttar Pradesh and Ganga Yamuna Doab. Important kingdoms like Koshala, Kashi, Kuru, and Magad were established. What are the famous literary works of the later Vedic period? The famous literary works of the later Vedic period are the Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Two great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, were also composed during this period. What changes took place in the political structure during the later Vedic age? Several important changes took place in the political structure. The tribal structure of the early Vedic age gave way to kingdoms. Territories were called Janapadas and kingship became hereditary. The Sabha and Samiti assemblies lost importance. Administration became more complex and many officials were appointed. The king's power was strengthened by yajnas like Rajasuya Yagya, Ashwamedha Yagya, and Vajapaya Yagya. The king acquired income through taxation, bali, collected by officers. Briefly describe the four ashramas. The later Vedic texts mention four ashramas. Brahmacharya, first stage of life where boys stayed in Gurukul and studied the Vedas. Grihastha, second stage where man married and led a family life as a householder. Vanaprastha, third stage when man gave up worldly life and lived as a hermit in meditation. Sannyasa, final stage where he renounced worldly life and aimed at salvation. The society got sharply divided during the later Vedic age. Justify this statement. During the later Vedic age, Varna system became rigid and hereditary. The status of a person was no longer based on his occupation but on his birth. The Brahmanas and Kshatriyas enjoyed privileges while the Vaishyas formed common people engaged in trade and agriculture. The Shudras served the three higher Varnas and were deprived of education and property. As a result, society became deeply divided and inequalities increased. During the later Vedic period, at what age was a boy sent to Gurukul? What was the relationship between the Guru and his students? A boy was sent to Gurukul at the age of 7 and stayed there till he was 25 years old. The teacher treated the students like his own children, and the children regarded the teacher as their spiritual father. What was the method of teaching in a Gurukul? The students lived a simple and disciplined life. They memorized lessons taught orally. After completing education, they paid Guru Dakshina to the teacher. Women were not allowed to study Vedic literature. What was the method of teaching in a Gurukul? A boy was sent to Gurukul at the age of 7 and stayed there till he was 25 years old. The teacher treated the students like his own children, and children regarded the teacher as their spiritual father. Throw light on the religious beliefs of the later Vedic period. The gods of the early Vedic age lost importance. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva gained prominence. Female deities like Lakshmi, Durga, Kali, and Parvati were worshipped. Worship became complex with sacrifices and rituals like Ashwamedha, Rajasuya, and Vajapaya. Religion became expensive, increasing the role of Brahmanas. Common people found it difficult to follow, leading to the rise of simpler religions later. What are the main principles of the Hindu philosophy? The three main principles of Hindu philosophy are dharma, every person has moral duty to do what is right and live a pious life. Karma, people face consequences of their actions. Future life depends on past deeds. Transmigration of soul or rebirth. The soul is immortal and never dies, but takes birth in new bodies. What is the impact of Vedic civilization on India? The Aryan civilization is considered the cradle of Indian culture. The core of Hinduism is derived from the Vedas and Upanishads. The Sanskrit language and Vedic literature acted as a unifying force. Vedic culture laid the foundations of Indian society, religion, and philosophy that continue till today. So that was all about the later Vedic age. We have seen how the economy changed from pastoral to agrarian during the later Vedic period. We have also discussed how there was a deterioration in the position of women. We have seen the emergence of new gods, especially the female deities, and we have also seen the position of decline of women. So that was all about the later Vedic period. Hope you have liked the video. Support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. Thank you.